Hi, I'm Scott Cosenza, filling in for Sarah Cowgill, along with Lisa Donner, Graham Noble, Dave Patterson, and John Claw. And this is The Conservative Five, a video production of Liberty Nation News. On today's episode, Iran mess, SCOTUS rules, and a deportation dilemma. Spring is ending, along with the Supreme Court's term. In Supreme Deadline, SCOTUS and the Liberty Docket will tell you the latest from the court and what's coming next. In Can Iran Survive Trump and Can MAGA Survive War, we talk about war with Iran from the libertarian right. It's Mexifornia versus the feds, and illegal immigrants get the full Homan treatment with a Padilla arrest kicker. Finally, place your bets and play along at home with Just for Fun, Volume 73. All this and more on this edition of The Conservative Five. Associate Justice of the United States, Ketanji Brown Jackson, made nearly $3 million from her memoir, according to new disclosure reports. While we're waiting for Senators Durbin and Whitehouse to demand her resignation, we may as well take a look at her other work and that of her colleagues. I'm speaking, of course, of the United States Supreme Court, the single branch of government whose actions can only be corrected by itself or a constitutional amendment. What are the rulings, and what does it mean for liberty? What are they up to now on childhood puberty blockers and trans indoctrination, FBI wrong door raids, and birthright citizenship? John Clark, you're a fellow member of our revered and reviled club of attorneys. Does the court deserve one or the other for its latest work?
Most interestingly is the recent Scrimeti case out of Tennessee concerning whether the state could prohibit hormone blockers or puberty blockers and hormones for minor children. And the court divided along partisan lines or ideological lines, with the majority ruling that that statute could stand. Interestingly, the Biden administration had opposed the Tennessee law, and the Trump, with the change of administration, switched on that and and supported the Tennessee law. And what's interesting about the way the court addressed this is that it basically determined that Tennessee had not used a prohibited protected class in its statute, and therefore it didn't arise to strict scrutiny review under the Equal Protection Clause, which was the basis of the challenge, and only rational review. And as people may know, if a state law is subjected to strict scrutiny, it's pretty much a death knell for it. It'll rarely pass that kind of a standard. Whereas conversely, if it's rational review, it'll almost certainly get the green light. Interestingly, though, the concurring opinions of Thomas, Bartlett, and Alito all basically said they would have gone another step and said, this is not a preferred or protected category, that is transgender people. And then the dissent, which included the usual liberal side of the bench, found that this was violative of the Equal Protection Clause, even though Ms. Jackson apparently didn't know what gender was. She does now. But also it's interesting because really the court ruled that it is not the court's province to make determinations about fuzzy medical science, and that states have a lot of discretion to decide what's best for medical care. And in fact, Justice Thomas, in his concurrence, pointed out that neither do ideological medical people tell us what the Constitution means. And so I think there's an interesting laying of groundwork by the majority and the concurring opinions for a future battle that will take this bull more fully by the horns.
Right. Now, so, Scott, can you explain a little bit, out of the legalese?
Based on watching some coverage of it from the excellent SCOTUS blog, who was live blogging from the court, they said that I think it was Sotomayor who was reading from the bench her dissent, which is a kind of when justices are oftentimes highly motivated with their dissents and feel especially motivated to announce their opinion. They will read sometimes from when the decision is announced, they'll read it from. And in fact, Scalia was famous for this. It was one of my favorite things about Justice Scalia is he would do this. Well, Sotomayor does it sometimes as well, more than others. And she said, John, that her colleagues on the court who voted for allowing the lower standard of scrutiny, what they were doing was actually wrong because the law discriminates on you can give testosterone to a boy under the current status of the law with this new ruling, but you couldn't give testosterone to a biological female who wishes to transition or something like that. And so therefore that it did violate equal protection. And as John mentioned, but just to unpack it a little bit more, fighting over what standard of review the court's going to apply to a case is kind of the first oftentimes battle for how we approach cases as lawyers, because if you get a very strict standard, and in this case they were going for strict scrutiny, whether it's a speech imposition or like this case, an equal protection imposition, you're almost always going to win if you're the challenger and you get that standard of review, rather than what's called the rational basis standard, which basically I can't even recall when the court has overturned a ruling that got rational basis review, because the standard is just if it's rationally related to a government interest, then it's allowed to pass. So that's sort of the background of the scrutinies.
Well, I would add that I didn't see the SCOTUS blog, but I did. In reading the decisions, it was particularly fierce between the justices, and the majority and concurring opinions went to great lengths to seek to discredit the minority dissent. So that echoes the same. Definitely, there are some strong passions on both sides on this issue within the court.
Did anybody find it interesting that, well, apparently this is the only second time the court, the high court has taken up the transgender issue. And did anybody find it interesting? And is there anything we can read into the fact that Chief Justice John Roberts penned this opinion?
As a lawyer on the panel, I hate to dominate, but I'll just let everybody know that the Chief Justice generally assigns opinions to who he is. That's part of his purview. Now, every justice may write independently, but there is usually a minority opinion and a majority opinion. If there's a dissent, if obviously there's no dissent, there's one opinion, and the Chief Justice assigns that. So this means, Lisa, he assigned it to himself, and I expect he did that because he wanted to vote to allow the law, but control tightly the kind of lanes that decision was issued in.
Right. He wanted to be central to the rhetoric.
Yeah, and narrow the scope so it didn't get too far afield, so that he could still vote with the majority.
So as lay people can we say this is a win for blank?
I would say it's not a win at all, as long as we are even as long as we are anywhere near treating so-called transgenders as some kind of minority group or some kind of group that deserves any kind of protection. This is a group of people who are united not by any kind of biological imperatives that really exist in real life. They're united by a preference. And what concerns me, and there'll be people who hear me say this and go, okay, now he's just going, this is ridiculous. He's taking this whole thing way too far. But here's what alarms me about this situation is there was a time when we called people who sexually abused children pedophiles. But now there's suddenly a class of people that are called minor attracted persons. And it's an attempt to normalize what is literally pedophilia. Now, so what? We recognize the trans people as some kind of group that deserves special protections. What's next? The minor attracted persons can now say, well, you can't criminally charge us for having sexual relations with minors because you're discriminating against our group that deserves protection. It concerns me.
Well, where I come down on this, just from whatever the 2 cents are worth, is from a parental point of view. I think that this business should be in the hands of the parents and not in the hands of the state. I just feel very strongly about that.
So you think the parents should be able to see doctors administer opposite sex hormones from the biological?
No, I just think the state should get their nose out of what's going on in homes, and parents should have the last say.
That's an interesting perspective from you. I'm a bit surprised to hear it. As a libertarian, I'm always in favor of the state butting out of people's lives. I do, however, think that there is a duty to protect minors, including from their parents in some instances.
I'm assuming that most parents aren't advocating on behalf of their child changing genders. I think it's fairly rare.
Well, I think you, especially here in Vermont, you might be surprised to know that a majority here probably would support this. But interesting to your point, though, is that in the end, this is ultimately the court's saying they're not going to butt into the science, and yet they cited a number of studies and countries in Europe who have backed away from this. And particularly, I found it interesting that Justice Thomas discussed at length the Cass Review, which is a British study, perhaps the most comprehensive study done, that shows that these profit-making interventions are probably, there's insufficient evidence to show if they work. They may be very harmful. So sort of like protecting children from parental abuse when it's physical, the state might have a role. I think I would agree with Scott. If in fact there's an industry that's pushing this on children without their full consent or awareness or proper study, like with any sort of drug or treatment. So but I think Graham's right too, that it really didn't decide what the genders are. This case did not do that. It said that they were classifying based on medical procedures and not based on gender, and therefore it was not subjected to strict scrutiny under the 14th Amendment.
You know, a minor can't even lease a car or enter a contract. It's called a voidable contract if you sign a contract with a minor. That's why they can't get phone contracts and every other thing, because we as a society have said we will not let them bind themselves to a legal, to giving up legal rights, because they don't possess yet. We can't be sure they possess the mind to do it. And yet somehow we're going to let them decide they'll never have children, for instance. I mean, that alone is the size of that decision and scope of it to suggest a, 12
Especially
or
to make it when you're
13-year-old.
13 years old. Right. Exactly.
Exactly right. Yeah. But this decision, I just wanted to circle back to Graham's point about the minor attracted persons thing. Just so you know, Graham, this wasn't a case where people who are trans or were addressed as a class. And actually, one of the ways that the dissent discussed it was that it's actually sex-based discrimination, because the ruling on whether you can give this medicine or this treatment depends on the biological sex of the patient. And so that's sort of how they were couching it. So anyway, I bring up that point because this doesn't say that these laws are legal or that they're not legal. It just says that the Tennessee law gets applied the lower standard and passes muster under that standard. So we're probably going to be more in the future about this.
I'm curious as to how it is that we have come from what anyone would have thought 15 years ago, maybe even fewer years ago, that what these people are advocating was child endangerment. It is almost beyond the pale of understanding that we now are talking about it as an option. And this is the other thing is that the delusional nature of what they're foisting on the poor child is also a problem. For boys, every one of the 36 trillion cells in their body screams they're a boy. For the ladies, it's 34 trillion. No matter what you cut off or what you add or how you medicate, that does not change. And so the whole world of this delusional thinking is just beyond my understanding.
All right, Dave, thank you. We're going to address the 2 trillion cell deficiency on another segment, but thank you, panel. I'm attracted to the court's business like a moth towards flame, with generally the same result, but we'll be keeping track of it all, and you join us as we track the latest rulings that affect your liberty. The U.S. is nearer to war with Iran than at any time since the hostage crisis in 1979. The situation seems to be changing hourly, and President Trump has demanded, in all caps, Iran's unconditional surrender. Meanwhile, a maverick Republican congressman who leans hard libertarian, Thomas Massie of Kentucky, has joined with a bunch of Democrats to try and prevent acts of war by U.S. assets via the War Powers Doctrine. Since only Congress can declare war, why even rely on the War Powers Act? Dave, I think the War Powers Act is unconstitutional, but before I pontificate on that sub-issue, tell us, are we at the precipice? And what might some likely scenarios look like for an actual hot war between us and Iran?
The very short answer, Scott, is no, we're not at the precipice. That's not to say that tensions aren't high, and many in the U.S. advocate for a preventive strike against the Fordo nuclear refinement facility and others in the insanely unlikely event that the mullah's leadership in Tehran would attack a U.S. enterprise, since the Israelis have so conveniently, with their suppression of enemy air defenses operations, left the skies totally open for anything the U.S. might indeed authorize. The destruction of the Fordo facility is appealing. You know, we've got the 30,000-pound GBU-57, what they call the massive ordnance penetrator. But my thinking is, should the U.S. be prompted to action, it should destroy the Iranian Navy, and particularly all of its submarines capable of launching cruise missiles, because there are more than 20 such submarines, and they could come out into the open ocean and threaten even the coasts of the United States. President Trump, despite his declaration for Iran's unconditional surrender, I think, has also made it very clear he would attack Iran if Iran strikes the U.S. base, facilities, or Americans. And if that happens, all bets are off, I think. This U.S. position, it's been made clear on numerous occasions that the outcome Trump wants is for Iran to dismantle its nuclear developments, destroy whatever weapons are near ready upon, and open all the nuclear facilities to rigorous inspection. And particularly, what people are forgetting, and what the Israelis have not forgotten, is he wants them to dismantle the ballistic missile production and the remaining inventory. And regarding your belief the War Powers Act is unconstitutional, well, it's been seriously challenged in the court, as you know, 4 times since 1982. And each time the complaint was dismissed.
Dave, they often get it wrong. I didn't say that that the court agreed with me.
Yes, lawyers lament.
And I will get into that if we have time later on in the segment about why I think that. But before we do, I wanted to ask you, we've seen with the war between Russia and Ukraine, the use of, relatively speaking, very inexpensive drones to wage significant parts of that war to great effect. Presumably Iran could do likewise. I don't expect it, sitting here in Virginia, I'm likely to be subject to an attack by Iran. But around the world, we have so many assets in so many places where presumably getting, small drones positioned to conduct an attack would not be, an insurmountable effort for the Iranian state. Is that something that you've thought about, and how that might,
sure,
that might work out?
I think you have here the reverse of the small pinprick, moving the large the large immovable object. So what I mean by that is, okay, so you attack a U.S. base or some facility or an embassy with your little drones. The United States will wipe out Esfahan. Is that a good trade? It will wipe out the ports of Hormuz. Is that a good trade? I doubt it. That's not the same dynamic you have with Ukraine, who is in an active battle with Russia, and you're trading back and forth significant attacks.
Well, let me segue to Lisa and Graham, who I want to have weigh in on the political issue. And as an entree to that, I will say, I almost would be certain that Trump at this point would not authorize U.S. boots on the ground in Iran because of the threat of dead bodies coming back and having to meet those, flag-draped caskets for a war with Iran. But he may have to do that if they attack U.S. troops in third and fourth areas. And so that, to me, is where that becomes an interesting issue. But I'll ask you to put a pin in it, Dave, and have Lisa and Graham weigh in. MAGA, a lot of MAGA folks are anti-war and voted for Trump to have no new wars. And here we are with Trump seemingly leading us head on into a war of choice. Please.
Well, I thought it was kind of interesting that Tucker Carlson had a lot to say on this. And Trump wasn't happy with it. And I think Trump is kind of in between a rock and a hard place here. He doesn't really want to get us into war, but he's got to talk tough. And that's what he's doing right now. He's talking tough. And I think MAGA country is supremely uncomfortable with the tough talking. They're supremely uncomfortable with us getting involved. And I think, if we do get involved, it'll just be air support.
Well, initially at least, right, Graham?
Well,
These things can spiral out of control pretty quick.
Yeah, the mission creep is always a problem. Although I think it's less likely under Trump because he's very much, he's not a neoconservative. He's not really a conservative either, to be honest. But he's certainly not. It would be political suicide. Well, of course, he doesn't. He's not going to be running again for president. Even within the remainder of his term, it would be political suicide for him to get us into a war. Beyond anything more than perhaps some slaps on the wrist to Iran in terms of, kind of a few drones going over there and taking out some top people or something. And I don't think anyone in MAGA country, as we're calling it, would object to that. But anything more than that, even kind of a large scale bombing campaign of the interior of Iran would even be something that I think a lot of his supporters would not want to happen at all. Of course, the danger, the ultimate danger is that this is really an existential problem for Israel. I personally don't believe for 1 second that if the mullahs in Iran if they find themselves with a deliverable nuclear warhead or more than one, would they have the missiles, they have the means to deliver those missiles business end first to Israel, they will. I believe that they are crazy enough that they will actually do it. And so I believe that Israel feels it is absolutely imperative that their nuclear program is wiped out. I would very much hope the US doesn't have to help them to do it and that they can do it themselves. But of course, I also believe that if Israel is not capable of doing it, and Iran gets to the point where they have a nuclear weapons, they have the missiles to fire them, and they are on the brink of nuking Israel, I think at that point, politics be damned, we would have to step in and take lethal action against them.
One of the things that's going on, though, is the pronouns. People are MAGA countries are getting very uncomfortable with the pronouns. What's this we, Kimosabi, like Israel and us, it's now we, and people are not happy about that.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Lisa. I think that's a bad. I think that's a bad thing. I don't think he should be talking like that. I think his speech should reflect the fact that Israel is a close ally of ours, and it is in a war, and we are. We're kind of we're on the sidelines, we're observers, but of course that's our ally, so we kind of got their back. But yeah, I agree. When we start saying we, then it's almost you're saying almost de facto the US is already a part of this conflict, and nobody wants that. Among Trump supporters, anyway, nobody wants that.
I'm happy to have a discussion about pronouns that doesn't involve trans, he, her, she, him, whatever calling. I saw that Tucker called out Ted Cruz on this when he said, we did this. And he's like, are we at war, with Iran? He's like, no, we just gave support. But I wanted to say, Graham, I don't know that I agree with you that MAGA people will be basically kosher with the support role that maybe includes drone and other strikes on Iran because of basically then, it's the camel's nose under the tent. And I hear you see you wanting to cut in. But before I let you, I want to ask John Clark, because I know he is deep MAGA, MAGA country with many connections high up in that area. And I just want to understand, is he hearing any, what's he hearing about this? Are people behind it? Are they skeptical of this exercise of power or what?
Well, that's interesting because that dovetails with both Lisa and Graham's comments. Graham sounds sort of the hawk variety, but there are a lot of isolationists within the party that Lisa correctly points out. I think that Tucker Carlson is the isolationist in chief, and the barbs have been flying sharp and fast within MAGA, and the left is observing, look, the right wing are divided over this issue. Well, it's complex, it's nuanced. So are the Democrats. One issue, as Graham alluded to, is, are we really looking at a nuclear-armed Iran that could threaten the region or the world? In which case, do we, as Americans, have interest in that? We, many are saying, are already using Israel as a proxy, and without our our munitions. They couldn't fight it anyway. So it raises the whole Zionist versus anti-Zionist camp. This country has a long history of being bipartisan in support of Israel. And now both parties are divided to some degree over that issue. And so there are a lot of fracture points. But of course, Iran is more than just building nukes. It's also involved in the big three H's, the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah. So there's a lot of turmoil in the region. And so what is the off-ramp for Donald Trump is a question. How do you defang the Iranian government, which that's another dimension, which is arguably a lot of regular Iranians are not on board with the annihilation of Israel and spending their own treasure on shipping weapons to other nations to engage in that war. And then China has sort of stuck its nose into the midst and is using it as an advertising platform for how much better its munitions are than the Russian weapons the Iranians have, literally. So it really is, it is kind of a mess. And as far as any particular insights, I think Donald Trump has said he's an America first isolationist. He pulled us out of Syria to much, opposition by the neocons and the military industrial people. So I do think that Lisa's right. He has a tough row to hoe here. And I think nobody really wants to see war escalate. But as Graham points out, at some point we may have to take this bull by the horns, we, and being Americans, if it leads to preventing a nuclear holocaust. And I don't know what the answer to that question is. I mean, that has a lot to do with experts above my pay grade about how far along Iran really is with its nuclear ambitions.
Well, I can tell you that from the libertarian MAGA perspective, the criticism is that Israel and especially Benjamin Netanyahu have been saying that they're 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years away for the last 30 years to try to goad us into these attacks. But we're going to have to leave it there. And that includes Dave and my in-depth discussion on the constitutionality of the War Powers Act. That's all for now on the Theocracy in Persia. Thank you, panel. The Great Deportation is upon us. We've got Mexican flag-waving hombres fighting federal authorities in L.A. and other major cities around the U.S. Is this a Soros AstroTurf affair or something more genuine? Meanwhile, getting arrested in protest of some immigration enforcement action is becoming de rigueur for all the most progressive politicians, where arrested is the new black. We're a nation of immigrants, and we're a panel with an immigrant, too. Graham, I know you're here legally, but what about those who came with the tacit permission from President Biden and without a real legal pathway to residency? Are aggressive deportations consistent with your American values?
Well, there's a great philosophical argument behind that, which I know, Scott, you as a libertarian take a certain side in, and I kind of do as well to an extent. I think the backstory here to this whole situation, of course, is do governments, any governments, have the right to tell anybody in this world where they can and cannot live on the planet? Or should we all be allowed to go and live anywhere we like? And the libertarian in me says, yes, that's how it should be. But unfortunately, Western liberals killed that beautiful idea when they came up with the horrendous notion of the welfare state. Because once you've got a bunch of first world countries that will hand out free money and all kinds of government assistance to people they deem who are in need, then, of course, if you open all the world's borders, about a third of the population of the entire third world would overwhelm the Western world, and our society would collapse. And it literally would happen probably within a matter of a couple of years. So if we want open borders, we got to get rid of the whole welfare state apparatus altogether. And that way, then everyone could live wherever they wanted to live and fend for themselves, and it will be wonderful. But beyond that, people on the political left, the progressives mainly, have two particular beefs here. And of course, one is they want the illegal immigrants here because those immigrants, they're counted in the census. That makes a difference to how many congressional districts a state has, which of course directly reflects in the electoral college. And so it's an election winner for them. But also it's deeper than that, and more insidiously than that. It is a way of actually destabilizing Western society, or they see it as a way of destabilizing Western society. So I think you got those two things. Should we be forcibly mass deporting people? I believe in the current situation, unfortunately, I see it as not only legal but necessary. Even though, like you, Scott, in the core of my being, I want open borders. But people have to take responsibility for themselves if they want to live wherever they choose. But in this country,
do you give Graham the let's call it the other side in terms of the big government giveaway, socialist pro side, more power by then saying, okay, you get to control these other downstream things if you're willing to, if you get the win on the benefits? Because I hear what you're saying. Look, you can't allow everybody to be here because we'll basically be bankrupt, if you will. But the choice is to then restrict the spending as far as this libertarian, by the way, third generation immigrant. So I identify and feel the issue both intellectually and in a very real, I'm very connected to my immigrant ancestors, and think that, when I see these people who aren't, the violent, felons type, I just mean the regular people who are just here illegally and don't have permission to stay and have been told to leave and they're getting snatched up, I see myself, I see my ancestors as people who could, that could be the same thing for them. They're looking for a better lot for them and their kids, and we're the best choice they had. So they came here, and it does kind of kill me a little bit to see them snatched up and sent away.
But I think the problem, you're equating people who came to this country maybe turn of the 20th century who really wanted to make a better life for themselves with a lot of people who come here with rap sheets, felonies, they commit. I think the people that Homan is after are the people that are doing our society harm, not the people that are picking the vegetables.
Well, apparently that's recently what Trump was saying, that they're going to focus less on going after the people who are out there picking the fruit and doing their being
exactly
essentially are performing indentured labor, indentured servitude almost. I mean, these people are practically slaves, which is a whole other issue that I've got with the whole illegal immigrant thing. But yeah, and I believe that we should be absolutely prioritizing the actual criminals. If I was born into a poor family in Guatemala, I probably would have crossed the border into the United States by the time I was a teenager.
Well, that's what they're doing. They're prioritizing this. They're sending back the ones that are, committing.
I empathize with these people, but I just still come back to the thing where, anybody who's in this country illegally should not be receiving a single penny in any form of government assistance whatsoever. If they're here illegally, if they can actually, fend for themselves and be self-sufficient and feed themselves and their families, and even, pay taxes out of their paychecks, then not that I'm a big believer in income taxes anyway, but
that's the thing, right?
If they can, in other words, if they will put themselves in a position where the government will steal their money the way it steals Americans' monies out of their paychecks, then yes, I have at least empathy for them,
Yeah.
But
just so you know, and everybody else knows, many illegal aliens do pay taxes.
That isn't
they're required by law to file taxes, and many of them do. I actually knew a lawyer decades ago who was like a volunteer at a farm labor camp to make sure that those people had properly filed, so that they wouldn't have the additional burden, in addition to being here illegally, of being in arrears on federal taxes. And by the way, I just wanted to specify for anybody who may not know, Graham, there's plenty of us libertarians who think that no one, illegals or legal, should be getting government largesse, and that's an impermissible use of the public purse to give away.
Oh, indeed, yeah,
goodies to.
I agree, Scott, and I think it is true that libertarians. I mean, I am more a libertarian than I am anything else. I'd prefer just call myself a constitutionalist. But yes, I do believe in that there shouldn't be any government assistance at all. So.
Yeah. Let me ask John Clark a question here. I've seen a lot of these Twitter videos and YouTube videos of these arrests taking place, and it seems like a lot of them are they're actually positioning themselves at courthouses where they know people will be there for immigration hearings. And just to Lisa's point, it seemed like maybe they weren't felon types, but just folks who were not successful in getting legal residency, but they seem to be getting snatched up. John, do they need a judicial warrant to snatch somebody up? And what if they're wrong? What if they're, there's that famous Cheech Marin movie, was it Born in East LA, where he got deported as an illegal alien, but he was born in LA. Anyway, what happens if they get it wrong and they take the wrong person? Is there redress, and what's the scoop there?
We certainly seem to be looking at this from a libertarian angle here, but implicit in this conversation is the rule of law and what it is to be a citizen. And to your point, as libertarians, if we had no borders, we'd have no citizenship, so we wouldn't have the constitutional divisions that we have that do distinguish citizens from non-citizens. And in the screaming and howling against Donald Trump for deporting people without supposed due process, people seem to forget that the Obama administration deported some 3 million people, which from what I've read, 75 to 85% of them did not have any so-called due process. People who are here illegally do not have the right to bear arms, I don't think. They don't have the right to vote. That's pretty clear. But certainly certain constitutional rights do obtain through our laws to all people, whether they're U.S. citizens or not. In the case of deportations, and in answer to your question, if they were to deport someone who's actually a U.S. citizen, yeah, they could be in trouble. But when you come to talking about the rights of illegal immigrants, what is their right, even if they had further rights in a deportation proceeding? The question is, are you here legally? If not, goodbye. So you would have a legal right to adduce that you are actually a citizen, right, which would be the purpose of these hearings. And if you can't prove that, then you really have no recourse. So I think in reality, if our federal authorities are doing their jobs properly, they neither desire nor will they deport people who are actually U.S. citizens or here on a green card in violation of because that gives them certain rights as well. And so those howling that, they're going to deport legal Americans, and some, I think it was Bruce Springsteen was saying they're deporting American citizens already. I don't think that's a real threat. And the other thing, speaking to Graham's point, what we see here, and Lisa's point, is that the gradation between criminals and people here legally has been blurred more and more to the extreme left. And polls show, as I've written here at Liberty Nation, that Americans are tiring of this and they don't want to support rapists and drug dealers and fentanyl dealers. And so, that expansive effort to open borders to all is actually causing more and more people to move politically in the opposite direction.
Yeah, we've seen that too with Hispanic populations included, which I know has surprised many pollsters. I will kind of we don't have to call it a correction, but a massaging of your point, which is that you don't just have to be a U.S. citizen to enjoy due process rights before courts. You can be legally here in many other statuses, or even illegally here, but that doesn't mean you have none of those rights. But let's turn our attention to those. Let's turn our attention to the political aspect here with an interesting clip.
As our law enforcement officers have been assaulted, they've been pelted with rocks and bricks. Their cars have been set on fire. Molotov cocktails have been used. We have seen people throw bottles and hammers at them. We've also seen that they have been attacked and verbally spit on or punched or assaulted, and it's just not acceptable. The Department of Homeland Security and the officers and the agencies and the departments and the military people that are working on this operation will continue to sustain and increase our operations in this city. We are not going away. We are staying here to liberate this city from the socialist and the burdensome leadership that this governor and that this mayor have placed on this country and what they have tried to insert into this city. So I want to say thank you to every single person that has been able to do this. Also, I want to talk specifically to the rioters and to the politicians in Los Angeles.
Half a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your.
I also want to talk about specifically.
I was forced to the ground. First on my knees, and then flat on my chest. And as I was handcuffed and marched down a hallway, repeatedly asking, why am I being detained? Not once did they tell me why.
I heard Democrats were trying to fix a problem of appearing unmanly. Lisa, will crying over a nothing burger like that butch up the world's oldest active political party?
Okay, everybody get out the violins. You know,
World's smallest.
really incredible. That was something that's hardly ever seen. Of course, the most famous tearful scene by a politician was in 1972. That was Edmund Muskie, senator from Maine, and he was crying over
by attacking me,
a piece written about his wife.
by attacking my wife.
You know, you can see why that would make sense, right? But there were two other presidentials. It was Ford. Ford cried over his wife, and someone else cried over their wife. But, you know, it's not a good look for presidential politics, even though this guy's a senator. And, you know, I just don't think he did well by starting to cry.
Why am I being detained?
So, Scott, I think, it seems fairly clear that Senator Padilla was grandstanding for public recognition.
No, how dare you, Dave?
The
You
amusing
think that was
part,
fake? I think that was real.
the amusing part of the whole thing was that Padilla had such immense influence in the Senate and within government that no one knew who he was. For all anyone knew, he was, the incident happened. He was just some oafish loudmouth attempting to disrupt the Secretary Noem's press conference. And when all the dust settled, it turned out that he was an oafish loudmouth senator from California attempting to disrupt Secretary Noem's press conference. Padilla was standing up for the most nonsensical position. Victor Davis Hanson said it best, really. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, he says, here you have on the streets of Los Angeles protesters waving flags of a country to which they do not want to return while burning the U.S. flag of a country they are resisting leaving. The Democrats are once again grasping at the losing straws here.
There's another thing that he did, which was increase the ignorance of the American population, which is woefully ignorant in this area, that somehow you now have a right to be informed of why you're being arrested. Right. And you see these videos all over social media where people, quote unquote, refusing to be arrested because of some imagined right that they have. But we're gonna have to leave it there, panel. Thank you. And please, aspiring progressive politicians, it's not civil disobedience if you pretend getting arrested was a surprise. It's fraud. In the words of Joey Swoll, you need to do better. If it bleeds, it leads, but it can't be war and famine all the time. Let's have some fun with Diamond Dave and our Just for Fun segment. Dave Patterson is not just an eloquent writer and long-standing Pentagon insider. He's also in the running for funniest member of the Liberty Nation universe. And next to President Trump, of course, our favorite game show host. Dave?
Thank you, Scott. Yes, it's time for America's most underrated game show, Just for Fun. This is a show where our panel of political wonks, dare I say experts, show the depth of their knowledge. So, contestants, remember, this is a show that's called Just for Fun, but consider carefully your answers as if your life depended upon them. The rules are simple. The first panelist to shout out the correct answer wins. Please wait until the entire question has been asked before shouting out the answer. Okay, let's get started. Ready, John? Say yes.
Yes, sir.
It's establishmentarianism. Oh, I was practicing. Okay.
Question 1. Recently, President Trump targeted 3 blue cities on illegal immigration. They were A, Waukegan, Illinois, Escanaba, Michigan, and Detroit, Michigan. B, Los Angeles, California, Chicago, Illinois, and New York City. C, New York City, Nashville, Tennessee, Hoboken, New Jersey.
B.
B.
Scott said B.
You
When
can't
said-
say you can't say until you're finished with the
I was
choice. I
finished.
thought that was the rule of the game.
Yeah, he did actually. Oh, did he say it before? Did Scott break the rule? The lawyer?
Yes, he said it right after B.
I'm sorry. Scott
That's
is
not fair.
That's right. You're exactly right. Although we don't care about fair, we do care about just. And Lisa had B, and that's the correct answer.
I had it at actually the same time as Graham and John, so I think it was a tie.
I'm giving it to you, Lisa.
Okay.
Never argue with yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, the main consumer price index was released on June 11th, and the annual inflation rose only 0.1%. This indicates A, the price of eggs are not tied directly to tariff prices. AOC and Bernie will tone down their attacks on oligarchs once they determine what oligarchs are. Tariffs are not driving inflation like everyone said they would.
C.
E.
John got it. It's C. Okay, the math is getting tougher. Question 3. What name did Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu give to the recent operation launched against Iran? A. Operation Matzah Ball. B. Operation Crouching Tiger. C. Operation Rising Sun. Or D. Operation Just Kidding.
C.
C.
Scott said C, and he is right. Okay, we have a really tight race here.
I thought it was Rising Lion, actually.
Crouching.
Operation Rising Lion. That's correct. Scott said C.
Crouching Tiger.
Okay, so let's go moving right along.
No,
Yeah, but you said Rising Sun. It wasn't.
Yes,
Rising
you said Rising Sun for only. So actually,
I meant that.
Graham's going to have to get some special credit for that, I think. I don't know.
I was
Okay,
I was picking the best of the options, but Graham actually knew it cold.
Yes, I guess I was thinking of Japan. Not. So, but C was the right answer. You guys are arguing.
Really? All right, I'll take
arguing with yes.
I'll take the credit
Okay,
usually
so
from the chair.
Question 4. The fake news story pushed by the legacy media claimed the president was going to invoke which act in response to the LA riots? A. Act 2 from King Lear. B. The SAVE Act. C. Alien and Enemies Act. Or D. Insurrection Act.
D.
B.
B.
It was D.
Graham got it. It is D. Okay.
Here you go, Graham.
Way to go, Graham. We're all tied. Question 5. Nancy Pelosi compared the LA riots to which event? The Boston Massacre? The January 6th riot? The bombing of Pearl Harbor? Or the 9/11 attack on America?
B.
Lisa got it with B. It was indeed January 6th, whatever that was. Question 6. Where was climate fanatic Greta Thunberg attempting to bring food when she ran into an Israeli naval blockade and sent home? A. A Swedish lutefisk festival. B. Annual gathering of the post-pubescence activist convention as David Hogue's +1. C. Gaza. Or D. Crete.
C.
C.
John got that. He slipped it in. I heard it. Okay. Moving right along. Question 7. What was the parade in Washington, D.C. commemorating on June 14th? A. The 250th anniversary of Nancy Pelosi's first stock purchase while being a congressperson. B. The 250th anniversary of the Army. Or C. Bastille Day.
E.
B.
E. Trump's birthday.
B.
Lisa got that. That was Okay, Lisa has jumped out in front. Oh, moving along. Question 8. Recent documents from FBI field office files indicate that Biden's administration targeted Catholics as A, the Jackass Society, B, John Birchers, C, budding extremists, or D, budding pansies.
C.
John got that. He slipped it right in. Very
No,
good.
no, it was Scott that got it.
That was
Hello.
Scott. That was
Yeah.
Scott.
Was it Scott? Your voices sound so
Absolutely.
much the same.
Well,
Okay.
It wasn't me.
that's a nice compliment for John, I guess.
Yes, it is. A nice compliment for John, indeed. Question 9. In June 3rd press release, the U.S. Attorney Office for the Eastern District of Michigan identified 2 Chinese nationals attempting to smuggle what into the USA? A formula for soy sauce, B, a bioweapon, C, fentanyl, or D, a Betty Crocker cookbook in Mandarin.
B. Bioweapons.
Graham got that. Okay, wow, this is really shaping up to be a contest.
Lisa, you have no excuse on that one. You wrote the article for what we need to know.
B.
10. What lawmaker was indicted for assaulting a DHS agent at Newark Detention Center? Was it Sean Diddy Combs, Democrat from Rikers President? B. Jasmine Crockett, no relation to Davy, Democrat from Texas? LaMonica McIver, C. Monica McIver, D. from New Jersey, or D. Monica Lewinsky, an independent from California?
C.
C.
McIver.
Lisa got that. Again, Lisa is showing herself to be really the best of you guys. Okay, so our winner for this week's Just for Fun is... Let me have the envelope, please. Ah,
Hey, Lisa.
amazing.
Drum
It
roll.
is Lisa Donner. Let's give her a big hand.
Brown.
Golf clap.
Does anybody have a big hand? Well, the big hand says it's time for this episode to close.
Okay, congratulations, Lisa, and congratulations to you viewers at home who successfully placed wagers on this competition. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform: YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, and more. We're on them all. Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. And Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. I'm Scott Cosenza. Thank you so much for joining us today for the latest news and commentary. Your choice for free thinking, free speech. LibertyNation.com.